Good morning. I'm Wayworn Worm, and welcome to my channel. And welcome to episode 2 of the Ballad of Lithuania. Lemmikinus tried to blow warmth into his hands as his men finished gathering behind their small ridge. The nearby Lipaja Lake was frozen solid, or so he hoped. The priest Gerdanus would be leading his 100 men across it when the battle started in earnest. After months of chasing the Curonian army, they had finally caught up to them near the town of Groben, where they were foraging. The plan was fairly simple, truth be told. Sarunas is Gerbarchus would set up his men in a shield wall, with the lake to their right flank. Lemmikinus was gathering his men behind a small ridge to the left of the center, and Gardanus, who was getting ready to wipe out their scouting party, followed by a charge over the lake. Turning around in his saddle, he saw that his men had formed up. After almost 3 months of pursuit, we have finally caught up with the main Curonian army. At this moment, Gardanus should be finishing up the destruction of their scouts, while the main force marches toward our center. Without the report of their scouts, their leader assumes that the center is all we have. Once he commits, we will show him how mistaken he is. Lemmikinus stopped for a moment to let the men cheer. They deserve it. 3 months ago, they were called from their homes and told they'd fight a short winter campaign, then they would go home long before it was time to plant their crops. With them being gone, and being fed by food from the stores of the High Chief, their family would have more than enough to get through this winter. What he didn't tell them was there's another Curonian army in the south of Zematija, and even if there wasn't, they would still have to lay siege to several holdings before they could go home. They would almost assuredly miss the planting. Banishing such thoughts, he rode to the top of the ridge with his escort. Coterie had taken the bait, and his men were starting a charge toward the shield wall. Even as Lemmikinus watched, the ranks of the Curonians spread out as everyone raced each other to be the first to hit the wall. This is it, men. Tonight, we bury their dead. Charge! Lemmikinus yelled as he spurred his horse into action, and the mass of men behind him surged up and over the ridge. The frigid air caused his face to sting as his horse flew across the flat ground, kicking up snow with every step. He watched as the skirmishers in the back of the Curonian army started turning around, trying to face him. And then he was on them, hacking with his sword left and right. The panicked men were trying to find leverage with their spears as he felt the impact of his men joining him in the fight. It seemed like hours had passed when he came up on the first horseman in a long time. Lemmikinus raised his sword to attack when he noticed that the shield coming up to meet his sword was red with a white stag painted on it. Quickly lowering the sword, he greeted the horseman and asked to be taken to Sarunas. A few minutes later, he was out of the melee and entering a tent with a fire burning. In front of the fire sat one of the ugliest men he had ever set eyes on. Sarunas, so nice to see you alive still. His words were missing the charm they would imply, but he'd hoped it would be pinned down to his weariness. I see the gods didn't see fit to remove you from this world either, Lemmikinus. Sarunas scowled. I'm sure your men will get the glory for causing the almost complete destruction of the enemy, while my men will not even be remembered for their time spent fighting a foe outnumbered. Lemmikinus rolled his eyes. Your men almost match the entire army of the enemy, and you know it. How complete is our victory? Almost 100% complete. Gardanus was not able to march across the lake as quickly as it was hoped, and some of the enemy were able to escape that way, including Coterie. That being said, for every one man who escaped, another 3 lie dead. Also, there's news of the army in the south. They crossed the Niemen River near its mouth and have been following it through their land, now through ours. So far, they're passing all the towns, forts, and temples in the area. Zygomantis is Krasilai passed through the gate in Jerbarkis, idly noticing the men digging what could only be a moat around the wall of the hill fort. The bustle and rush around him in the courtyard brought a smile to his face. He had grown up not too far from here, and had visited often over the years, watching it grow. Now he was the chancellor to the high chief Velnias, while his younger brother acted as the head of his family's large farm. Eventually he found Velnias, and they retired to a small chamber in his hall. "How are you doing, my friend?" he inquired as they embraced. "Zigimanis, you were not expected back for some time. The war concluded a month ago. I thought you would be at least a few months wrapping up the details of Coteries' surrender," Velnias replied, greeting his friend and advisor. The two of them had known each other for several years, but recently Zygomantis had proven himself to be quite the diplomat. People had often said he was kind and friendly, ever willing to talk about any topic the person brought up, even if he knew nothing of the subject himself. Most importantly to Velnias was the fact that Zygomantis was gaining a reputation of a just man who dealt fairly with those he was negotiating with. Zygomantis grinned and shook his head, his full, red beard slightly wagging as he did. "No, the war was long enough. 1.5 years long, and you told the levies only a season. I figured the quicker I could finish, the better." In truth, there was nothing to get in the way of a quick resolution. Coteries' forces had been crushed, most of his land had been captured by the Zimigian forces, and a Norse adventurer was off the coast getting ready to invade. Not that that adventurer was much of a threat. The Lappish band and its 1,400 men were still pacifying the last remnants of Coteries' hold, while the adventurer maybe had 700 men following him. That said, it was nice to hear Velnias praise his good work. A somber look passed over Velnias' features for a moment. They really did not want to give up. On top of that, partway through, Lemmikinus asked me to name Sarunas the Marshal. The war dragged on even after the first Carunian army had finally been destroyed near Riga. He had been forced to hire a mercenary named Vigu the Quarreler, who led the Lappish band, to make quick work of the Second Carunian army, also near Riga. It had been during the siege of the city of Memel that Lemmikinus had asked to be replaced. He said it reminded him too much of Selphis, and he couldn't sleep after his men had charged down the streets of the city and put the place to the torch. He had suggested Sarunas be his replacement, and pointed out that the young man was better than he was at leading men. "Have you decided who will rule the new lands in your stead?" Zygomantis' question pulled Velnias out of his memories of the war. A war he had spent ensuring his men would get paid and fed, rather than leading them. "Yes, I have. There's a mystic named Jogilia, who has been hanging around my court for some time, who'll get the title of the Chief of Memel. He is respectable enough, not overly good at anything, but being lowborn, his fortunes will be tied to mine, thus ensuring loyalty. As for Kurzeme, that will go to Sarunas. He served me well during the war, and he did hold the center at Groben. So it was his banners that I passed the other day on my way here. The pale green tree on yellow and olive? He would never say it, but Zygomantis thought it was about the ugliest arms he had ever seen. Though his family was considered Lithuanian, and respected landowners, his Norse heritage still showed in his red hair and the long boats on his coat of arms. He was born here, wasn't he? Vilnius thought about it for a second before replying. Yes, to both. Like your family and even mine, his family owns quite a bit of land. When he became one of the top military leaders, soon after I inherited my titles, he took his arms. He still has family not far from here, and I suspect he'll be spending more time here at court than in his new hold. Zygimantus quickly nodded his understanding of what his liege was saying before changing subjects. I see you have your men building a moat below your walls. That should get him to talk about it. Zygimantus found it odd that after both wars Vilnius was in, he had built the defenses of his hill fort more in the wake. He had to learn what that was about. Vilnius laughed heartily at Zygimantus for a minute before bringing himself under control. Sorry, my friend, it's just amusing that you point that out. Keep in mind that almost every chief in this part of the world wants to claim the crown of Lithuania. Also, you must realize, as I do, we're not the largest, and most likely not the strongest chiefdom in the area. Until recently, Jurbarkis was nothing more than a hill with a hall on top. It would not be hard for determined attackers to rush the line of defenders and kill everyone in the hall. Then I built a wall. A wall of wood, to be sure, but still a wall. Not only do the attackers now have to break down the wall if they want to get into the hall, but the men on the walls will be even higher to rain their arrows down. Now I'm building a moat, so the attackers will have to either converge on the gates, or be crowded in, or they have to swim to the wall to break it down. The sound of horse hooves pounding against the dirt path matched the pound of blood in Vilnius's ears. His deep red cape flew behind him as he took a glance back to see the three horsemen in brown cloaks rounding the corner that he had passed moments ago. Refocusing on the path ahead of him, he pushed his horse on harder, trusting the beast to navigate the tangled roots that sometimes crossed the path. The men behind him were slowly falling back, caution getting the better part of them as he vaulted over a large log that had fallen over the path. The sunlight blasted him as he burst out of the forest with a loud cry, thundering down the path through the fields towards Jurbarkis. He realized he was smiling broadly as the lowborn made way for him. Nothing felt as good as feeling a horse gallop under oneself. He was brushing his horse down when the gates opened, letting the three men in. They looked as tired as their horses did. One of them, Jovardis, leaped off his horse and stormed toward him. What were you thinking? You should have died during that mad dash through the forest. Or worse, bandits could have come. You know there are always some out there, even this close to Jurbarkis. He shouted, his hood flying off his head as the man raged at his chief. Vilnius tried to fit his face to the seriousness of the situation. He successfully stifled a laugh, but he failed with a broad grin. Oh, you're just mad because your horses didn't have a hope to keep up. We're going down the paths that I know by heart. There are no bandits this close to the hall. Besides, the Velis were looking out for us most right now, entering our houses. I don't care. You cannot keep doing this. That's it. I've had it, he yelled, ripping off the patch on his cloak and storming out. Vilnius looked at the patch for a moment. Already, mud had turned the stag brown instead of black, and the red was muddled as well. He let Jovardis go. The man was a vassal, and he had to at least be listened to, if not followed. Neophytus, may you go into the afterlife and live without your illness. May you join your family's velis and advise them as you advised my father in life. Bubilus ended his speech as the Greek was slowly lowered into the ground. The traditional fire altar was lit near his head as the other grievers started a traditional song. He slowly walked over to his father. 26 is such a young age to die. Why did he die? Valnius looked at his newly adult son. Well, for one, he was from the south and not used to our cold north. For two, he was a eunuch. Eunuchs are frail of health. Look at it this way. He died when the world was being reborn, making him a veli of rebirth. But enough of that. You did wonderfully. Your study under Genuel was very successful. You know the ways of the faith better than almost anyone in my realm. Yes, I suppose I did, and I do. Thank you for letting me lead this funeral. Neophytus was a good man. He even followed our faith. Bubilus smiled as he looked at his father. Valnius the Magnanimous, they had started to call him. No, I will not fire her. Now that Neophytus is dead, there's no one left who's half as good as the shadowy arts as she. Valnius raged at the woman a few feet away. This was asinine of her to even think. Regana may be his wife, who had borne him 3 sons and a daughter, but she had no business stepping into the affairs of the realm. Not only that, but she had loudly complained about his spymaster in the past, so even if he did agree with her, everyone would assume she had just pushed him into it. Why should you not? You don't need anyone good at the shadowy arts, as you call them. You're just fine at them yourself. Or are you doing this just to spite me? Was I not good enough to only give you 4 children? 4 children that have almost made it to adulthood, I might add? Regana yelled back. She would stand her ground against her husband, even though she knew she'd lose this fight. Their fight would last long into the night, and the servants would, one by one, quietly leave the hall to let them continue. While Valnius was known for being kind to the people, he was not always such to his wife. But then again, she was not known for always giving the best of requests. Thank you so much for listening to episode 2 of the Ballad of Lithuania. Make sure you tune in on March 22nd for the next episode, and be sure to listen tomorrow for a special Friday show.